Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. It's good to see you all and be here before you. I'm here to discuss the legislative agenda for next year, 2025. This agenda was crafted with input from departments and staff, and then I'm bringing it forward to you for you to have your voice and input. And there is definitely plenty of time to make changes as things come up and as things I may have missed and you may want to add. But before we jump into the legislative agenda, I definitely want to give you an overview of what we might expect next year during 2025, with the caveat that it's kind of weird to be here before elections because elections are going to have a really large input and say in what the legislature decides to take up and do. And also, the makeup of the legislatures may or may not look significantly different, but I'll get into a little bit of that. So do I just press next on this? Oh, there we go. Okay. So the 2025 session will be a long session. It'll be 105 days. We start January 13th, which is a little bit later than we traditionally start, which means we go towards the end of April, which 4 months doesn't seem like a long time, but for some of us, it seems like an eternity, especially as their main tasks really are to write the operating budget. And when I say operating budget, that is really funds basic services, K through 12, DSHS, Department of Ecology receives a bulk of their funding from that. And then they will also have to write the 2-year transportation budget. And of course, that is everybody's big highway projects, safe routes to schools, which is sidewalks, bike and safety improvements, as well as any other local projects that you may see. And then the capital budget, that is stuff that gets funded. I'm talking about community centers, food banks, the new aquarium in downtown Seattle, if you've been there, has been funded through the capital budget. One thing of note that's going to complicate the work of the legislature is that they have a budget deficit. The budget deficit, depending on who you speak to, is anywhere between $5 to $10 billion. That is a substantial amount of money that the legislature is going to have to find a way to backfill, or they start cutting services. And mind you, K through 12, the legislature cannot cut K through 12 spending. K through 12 is a constitutionally protected right, and it must be funded. So the legislature has to set aside funding for K through 12 because that they have to meet. The rest of it, which is not a substantially large portion of the budget, is where they have room to make cuts if they want to pursue cuts. The conversation that a lot of folks are starting to have is like, what revenue options are on the table for the legislature to consider? I will say that we don't know, and the legislature won't know whether that deficit is going to grow. There are 2 more revenue forecasts that the legislature will receive to really help build their budget. The last revenue forecast that they utilize is in March. So that really will set the table for what their deficit looks like, or maybe it won't be as large, but that's wishful thinking on some of our parts. Another item to consider is that there are 4 initiatives on the ballot for voters tomorrow. 2 of those, which is the repealing the Climate Commitment Act and repealing the Capital Gains Act, if those pass, have a detrimental impact to the operating budget. So if those 2 pass, that 5 to 10 billion is an astronomical figure now, and is a larger gap that the legislature is going to have to overcome if those pass. But of course, everybody's holding their breath, seeing what that's going to look like at 8 p.m. tomorrow and hopefully later in the month. I should also state that as an election year, we will be having a new governor for the first time in 12 years, which is a substantial amount that the governor will have to implement. So the governor will have to decide what their legislative priorities are, as well as fill their executive cabinet on day 1, which is January 1st. And you can just imagine all the work and all the work in the back end that is going to have to take place in order to get that level of government up and running, and then also understanding how do I run a state for the next governor. We also have the entire House of Representatives, half the Senate, and elected all statewide elected officials. So you think of OSPI, you think of Commissioner of Public Lands, you think of the Insurance Commissioner. Those are all up for election. I say this because I think for the first time we saw a huge number of retirements in the legislature. So there's going to be a whole new crop of legislators trying to learn the ropes, trying to understand what their role and what their jobs are. And one of the budget writers described the budget deficit as the worst that they have seen since the Great Recession. No legislator has been there since 2008 and 2009, except maybe for Senator Santos and Senator Kaiser, who have been there for a substantial amount of time. But I'm saying that because this is all going to be new, and it's going to be a very difficult challenge for these folks that are very new coming into this role of, if there are cuts on the table, where do they make those cuts? I think in 08 and 09 and 10, there were a lot of cuts made to social services that we are still living in those repercussions. So I'm just laying that out for you to have an understanding of what next year is going to look like. I don't mean to say it because I don't want to rain on folks' parade, but just sort of letting you know where the mindset of the legislature is going to be. So with that said, what are some of the legislative priorities for the city of Burien? They sort of fell into these three buckets before you: healthy and thriving communities, quality of life and economic development, and behavioral health. So what falls into, can you read those? Yeah. Oh, okay. What do we mean with these buckets? So what we mean by dedicate current funding to address needs across the housing continuum is the state should develop and fund an investment plan that is scaled to meet the projected future housing costs. The legislature has done a really good job of passing a lot of land use changes, but haven't been the best at showing patience to allow cities to work on and implementing those changes to see how they shape our current housing continuum. Now, we are not building enough housing and we will have a shortfall, but what is the state's role in helping cities build and fund housing across the spectrum? Not just low-income housing, but workforce housing. What does it look like across that spectrum to really invest in and fund that? One issue that we have been hearing a lot here in Burien is, how do we meet the need that is at our door with the asylees? There has been a lot of our nonprofits have really taken in and done the work of helping these asylees in our community. And the requests from a lot of these nonprofits have been, when and where is a state going to get involved? Is there a hub and spoke model where we're not just, we need to figure out what space, what sources, what funding is out there, and we need one central system to where we can call and get that information and provide and assess, maybe this asylee needs to go here versus this other nonprofit. The state did provide $25 million this past session for this scope of work. They just released that form of funding, so some of our nonprofits are receiving that for the work that they are doing, and the International Rescue Committee has been chosen as the organization to run the hub and spoke model for this. But there's a greater need than there are resources, so we still need an additional funding and investment from the state, and for them to really play a pivotal role in the hub and spoke model of helping these families and making sure that they receive the right services and the right assistance in the right places from the right nonprofits. Quality life and economic development. One of the top priorities under this one, and has been a top priority for the Association of Washington Cities as well as the County Association, is revising the 1% property tax cap. And what they really want to do is lift that and tie it to inflation to make sure that cities can meet the needs and their services of their growing demands that you have seen as, dealing with inflation, dealing with increase in just general cost of business. How do we deal with that? For the first time, I have heard from legislators that this is a priority for them. I think we have bend their ear so long on this issue that now there is a willingness to sit at the table and have a conversation about what does this look like. I think it also is helpful that they are in a budget deficit and are also looking at ways to backfill, and so are a little bit more understanding of the situations that local governments find themselves in regards to your own budget deficits and how much it costs to do the general business of this city. The other one is, of course, continuously and always advocating for the Public Works Trust Fund. That is where a lot of infrastructure dollars come for cities to do stormwater projects, just basic needs of cities. They provide loans and grants depending on the project. It is continuously underfunded, and at one point in time, the legislature swept a lot of the money in that account to make themselves whole. So cities and counties have continuously talked to the legislature about making that account whole and continuing to fund that account. And for public safety, continuing to fund the basic law enforcement academy. That is where all the officers who get hired have to go for training. There's in the past years, there has been like a 6-month backlog. So you may hire an officer, but they have to go through that training first. And if you have a 6-month backlog, that sort of prevents you from moving forward with getting those folks and having them become police officers. The next one is behavioral health. For City of Burien, the co-responder model has been a high priority, and that has also been a priority of the state legislature, is making sure to fund those co-responder models and making sure that there are enough folks to go into those roles. I would say there aren't enough folks across all employment sectors. And so we're co-responder models and folks going into that is not, I would say we're not alone in that. There are many folks who are trying to stand those programs up, but can't find the adequate folks to make sure that they get the training and become co-responder and have those programs set up. So in the past, the legislature has created grant funding for those models, and we will continue to advocate for grant funding or just general money coming down to folks who already have a co-responder model, and making sure that can continue. So for next steps, we have time to discuss what things may have not been on there that you would like to see, or what things you may want to completely remove before your next meeting. I think November 18th, if I'm not mistaken. We will see what the elections have in store for all of us. I will note that I would probably say towards the end of November, the legislature, the House of Representatives, House Representatives, Republican and Democratic caucuses will meet and really sit down and look at what members sit on what committees and what members sit in leadership. We may see some committees grow or some committees will remove. And what I mean by committees is those are the committees that take up specific policy issues. And so we'll have a general framework of what senators, representatives will be assigned to what policy areas. And I think the one big thing that everybody's sad about is that Senator Kaiser will be officially retiring, and she has given her date as December 1st. And so that will either cause Representative Orwell or Representative Gregerson to move up and be in that position. And so that'll open up one of their seats, which is another issue of, King County Council picking who steps into that role. So we may have a new face in our delegation that we will be working with. And then we start rolling January 13th.
Thank you very much, Lyset. Time to just give Lyset compliments again, but Lyset's a great lobbyist and has fantastic relationships with both Democrats and Republicans on the committees that we need to focus on. So thank you for all of your great work, Lyset. I also get the pleasure of working with her both as Mayor Burien and also in my day job as well on some crossover issues. So always great to see you, Lyset. And thank you for being so good at your job.
Thank you.
So I just want to do a little sign posting here. So we have this in front of us now, but Lyset told us there's really no major rush. So if we want to do something similar, we just did with the step proposal, and we don't need to finalize anything tonight. And we don't even, I'm going to recommend we don't even motion to put it on the consent agenda for next week, but we motion to make it just a standard agenda item for next week so that it comes back, not next week, next meeting on the 18th, so that it comes back as a standard agenda item, and we can motion to amend or change it if we want, but we can give Lyset and staff direction on how we might want to make some additions for that 18th item. So that's what I'm going to recommend us do. Who would like to get us started off on their thoughts and suggestions, concerns, compliments? Councilmember Reiki.
Thank you. It's great to hear everything that is going on, and also a little scary. Or scary might be the wrong word. It is unknown. So I know that probably leaves you like, I don't know yet.
Yeah, I like to say that my crystal ball is beyond murky. It's just black at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know tomorrow, hopefully, and by the end of the month, we'll provide a little bit more, less murkiness on your crystal ball. There are some things that I feel like are priorities for Burien that I wanted to kind of throw out there. And I don't know enough about, yet in my role, I don't know enough about what ends up becoming something that can be handled legislatively at the state level. So some of what I might be saying is like, well, we really can't do anything about that. But I thought I'd throw these items out there as things that I think are priorities for our community. Recognizing too that, I think that the asylees, there are, they did set up that 25 million. I did talk to Mary's Place about that implementation, and hopefully there will be more funding that comes with that. Mary's Place did see a decrease in asylees that they had taken. And that was a conversation I had several months ago with them. So I don't know, what has happened since that time in terms of Burien, but we have limited visibility on actual impacts to Burien on the asylees. So I just thought I'd point that out. I am interested in pursuing funding for Burien's own police department one day. This is a long-term goal, not a short-term goal. But it is something that I think I would be interested in seeing as options for how we can obtain state, and I'll talk later about federal funding as options. So I wanted to throw that out there. Childcare funding is a huge issue within our community. We are taking steps and have taken steps through ARPA funding and other funds to be able to impact availability or increase capacity and training and education for childcare providers. So we are taking some of those steps, but that doesn't mean that we won't run out of funding for childcare. I saw that you had kind of the housing support piece. As you could tell, housing is a huge issue for us right now with the comp plan, and what we have to do over the next 20 years to be able to meet that housing. And you talked a little bit about that, so that was definitely on my bucket list. The 509 expansion, I think someone else will be talking more about that. I also am interested in, uh, so there's less mental health centers and treatment centers for people with severe mental illness and or SUD. And I'd like to see kind of an expansion of uh, those centers being offered, not here in Burien necessarily, but kind of a statewide issue where we really are addressing people's needs and not allowing for people with SUD and severe mental health to remain on the streets. Also, gang prevention issues, and organized theft rings are a couple of the other items that I had. So these are just kind of general bucket list items that I think are impacting Burien. That's it.
And on the childcare issue, there's a lot of interest from the legislature on what to do. So I know they have been having conversations with childcare providers in regards to what things do they need to see to present, to increase the number of slots being offered. And I think one of those is the rates that they are currently getting. Is can the legislature do anything to increase the rates to allow for them to have to pay their staff more? So that is a continuous item that the legislature has shown a lot of interest in, so.
Thank you, Councilmember Ake. Any other council members? Councilmember Moore?
Thank you. Thank you, that Rolodex that is in your brain. It's just, every time you present, it's amazing. I wanted to echo a couple of things that Councilmember Ake mentioned, the gang prevention and gun violence epidemic. I saw that the national lobbyist was discussing treating gun violence or understanding it as a public health issue. And that's something I'm very interested in. And I also wanted to ditto the childcare, the more support for all aspects of childcare, from training the providers to making it more affordable. Burien was involved in an opioid settlement and was did not receive very large amounts from that. And I think that conditions in Burien may have changed since the original discussions that were taking place for that settlement. And I'd be interested in whether that could be revisited in any way. 509 impacts, which are under WSDOT, interested in mitigation from noise, particles, and also from road impacts of more and heavier vehicles entering and leaving Burien through 509 as it connects to I-5. And then this is something a community member suggested was voting on school board elections being available for 16 or 17-year-olds as a beginning exercise in voting.
Voting on school board elections?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other council members? Councilmember Andrade?
I guess going on the same subject matter of Councilmember Ake and more, I guess in my mind, the gang prevention program seems a very negative words. I mean, is there something that we can go along the same lines of youth programs, teen programs, something that promotes positive versus negative. So I guess it's just mainly a comment.
I know the Department of Commerce has several grants for, they call them gang prevention grants, that are geared towards focusing on, providing services for teens to prevent them from going down that path. But I think that's just the title that it still maintains. Doesn't mean that it has to be the title, but it's always a good note to take into consideration.
Councilmember Mata, and just a reminder, we're gonna come back to the end to do thumbs up on each of these that I've heard a couple times. So go ahead, Councilmember Mata.
I think one of the things that are important is workforce training. As we have an aging population and we have a new workforce, it's how do we continue to make sure that they have in the entry level tools to be able to work not only on some construction sites, but also continuing education and vocational education. The other part is with the amount of dollars that are being spent by taxpayers, and when we look at taxpayers, well, I look at taxpayers and they come in different shapes, different forms. And I think that procurement, when it comes to DBs, certified firms in Washington State, women-owned businesses, has really lacked. There's been several studies that have continued to show that it's not improving. In fact, in the African-American community, there hasn't been any movement. And when it comes to state procurement, and this state has goals, it doesn't have federal mandates that we have federal dollars, but I do think that we need to do a better job with that. Also, we talk about transportation. I think transportation is going to be very important with Sun Transit, and the transportation bills that are going to be coming out are actually funding jobs. And I think that as we fund more jobs when it comes to transportation infrastructure, it helps generate the economy to get better because other things start stimulating. And I think also it's how are we promoting Washington or Seattle when it comes to imports, exports in the state of Washington. I think as we move forward, I believe that human services are important, but you got to fund those human services. So the question is, are we continuing to work on being a champion when it comes to export imports? And quite honestly, this airport continues to take its fair amount of traffic coming in and leaving. So the question is, what will the second airport be in the state of Washington? So I'd like to make sure that we keep an eye on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the location of the second airport is on a lot of folks' minds, and based on how those conversations went, I don't think anybody wants a second airport, which is a larger problem that the legislature is going to have to deal with.
They ended the coordinating committee.
Correct.
For it, yeah. So, okay, so let's go through and have some thumbs up on some of these. So let's start with what I took down last. So,
Mayor, I
Councilmember-
wanted to make sure I added a couple myself.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Garcia.
Thank you. Thank you, Lyset, on the presentation. This is great. You reminded me to take my anxiety medication because it's also really scary what's going to happen tomorrow. Either way, wanted to first, I guess, piggyback on what all the council members have mentioned. Right? It's public safety, it's economy, and it's a workforce development. And I just wanted to first, before I suggest some things, is there anything or any initiatives that the state or the Department of Commerce is initiating to take advantage of the World Cup in 2026 to do sort of like what Councilmember Mata has said and really push for us to do more awareness and trading partners, and the eyes of the world are going to be in our region in 2026. And I know that recently the FIFA boss was here in Seattle, but I just want to know if the state or other municipalities are doing anything to get ahead of the curve on this.
I know that the state this past budget cycle did allocate some money for planning purposes and make sure that they can meet the transportation needs and impacts of hosting. I can definitely reach out to a couple of folks to have some initial conversations to understand what it is that they are looking to do, and what they might be pursuing this coming session to provide you with that background, and maybe that'll help you shape what ask you may have on behalf of Burien for the state legislature.
Yeah, I think that'd be fantastic, because I think that is exactly the thing that we need to be very proactive on, in making sure that transportation support dollars for services to bring people. I know that I believe our economic development team is already working on a pilot program to do a shuttle bus to bring folks into the city to shop, but supplementing that long term via anything related to the World Cup would be fantastic. Also, I've mentioned, and I think the city has it on our pipeline to look into a park district for the city of Burien. I think us investing into our parks and finding a way that we can have the state support that, or any way to speed that along, will help along a lot with providing after-school programs, more facilities, soccer leagues, basketball leagues, and improved parks, which will go a long way towards gang prevention, drug addiction, and potential gun violence. I think that's another way to tackle that, in a way that invests into the park systems that we already have. And I think a park district, and codifying that, or finding sources for making that happen fast, would be really helpful. And lastly, just as a personal privilege, anything that can go towards a community soccer club. There's small leagues, inter-city leagues that develop, and I think these leagues provide jobs. There's some in Ballard, Olympia, Tacoma, and they also bring communities together and give owners pride of ownership of having your own soccer club, especially considering what we have coming in 2026. Anything that they could do to push that along? That's it. And it can be tied to the park district idea.
Okay, thank you. So we're gonna go through some of these suggestions and recommendations one by one and do some thumbs up, because we gotta have some direction on telling Lyset which ones to prioritize here. So let's start with kind of the main theme of Councilmember Garcia's, which was because we heard it last. Let's start with the main theme of Councilmember Garcia's idea of keeping an eye on and trying to get some commerce support for anything having to do with the World Cup and kind of our economic region for the World Cup. Is there thumbs up support for that? Okay, there's thumbs up support for that, Lyset. Going to Councilmember Mata's vocational education, vocational training, vocational procurement request, and kind of a focus for Burien. If there's thumbs up for that. Okay, Lyset, you've got thumbs up for that. So focus on Councilmember Mata's vocational education, vocational training. Okay, so 509 transportation stuff and 509 transportation noise mitigation, use mitigation. Is there thumbs up for that? There's many thumbs up for that, Lyset, for our 509 extension, focusing on anything having to do with that. SUD, substance use disorder, money and assistance. Councilmember Akey was discussing this, and so was a couple other folks. If there's thumbs up for Lyset to stay focused on potential money for that, all thumbs are up for that, Lyset. Going back to childcare and childcare requirements and childcare options and funding, expanding the supply of childcare. I know that the legislature is really focused on this, so thumbs up to C. Okay, almost all thumbs up for that, so that's a go, Lyset. And then gang prevention, gang investment, youth intervention programs, or the thumbs up for that, and universal thumbs up for that for the city of Burien. Okay, I think that hit almost all of them. I wanted to bring up one more around rental assistance and focusing on rental assistance as a platform for keeping people housed and helping folks with rent assistance. instead of rent control. So focusing on having the state do more work around direct payment and keeping people housed, like what we did during COVID. There's a big conversation next session around rent control. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to help incentivize the state go through what has already been done, which is direct payments of rental assistance instead of rent control, or kind of our mom-pa smaller rental units are totally worried about this. So I won't ask for thumbs up on that right now. I think we can maybe talk about that in a couple of weeks, just so we can do a little more education on what's coming down the pipeline on that one, because it's going to be a big topic next year. Okay, any other thoughts, questions, concerns for Lyset? Okay, thank you so much, Lyset.
Thank you.